Hello, everybody. This is Jake Wynn, Director of Interpretation at the National Museum of Civil War Medicine, coming at you for another of our virtual programs here on the museum's social media accounts. So we are broadcasting this pre-recorded program today on the museum's Facebook page and YouTube channel. Thank you all so much for joining us today. I am joined by Tim Talbott, who works at Pamplin Park down in Virginia. And today we're going to be talking about medical stories from the Petersburg breakthrough in April of 1865. The Pamplin Park Facebook page has been full of incredible stories about some of these soldiers, and we're really delighted to welcome Tim on to talk in more depth about some of these stories and to share them with us all today. How are you doing today, Tim?
Doing great. Thanks for having me on again.
Excellent. We are happy to have you back on. Tim has previously appeared in our virtual programming here for the museum, and we welcome him back. If you do enjoy these programs being hosted by the National Museum of Civil War Medicine, please go ahead and click the like button, the share button, wherever you may be watching this. Subscribe to our accounts and follow us. That allows you to see more of our stories. Also allows your networks to be filled with our stories as well. So you can share this important history, these stories that you enjoy. You can share them with your friends and family that way. Allows more people to join in these kinds of conversations. As I mentioned before, Pamplin Park has an amazing social media presence as well. So you want to go over there to the Pamplin Park Facebook page and give them a follow as well. We'll drop links for that into the comments section on the video, wherever you may be watching it. So you can go down there and give them a follow as well. So with all of that being said, I'm going to turn it over to Tim, who's going to lead us through our program today. If you do have any questions, this is a pre-recorded presentation today. If you do have any questions, please drop those into the comments section. We'll have staff who are going to be moderating the conversation there and adding in any relevant links, or we'll try to answer those questions. And if we get any that stump us, we'll throw them over to Tim and answer those questions after this video premiere is over. So with that being said, Tim, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you, Jake. Again, it's great to be back with you guys, and just to sort of give you a little bit of background on what we'll be talking about today. I think it's important to understand a little bit of the context of the breakthrough. I'm not going to take you all the way back to, say, the Overland Campaign, but between Cold Harbor and April 2nd, 1865, you're probably quite aware that there's a lot going on. Grant is going to try numerous times to capture Petersburg. And why Petersburg is so important, of course, is because it is that transportation and communication nexus. All railroad lines almost coming into Petersburg, and then supplying Richmond to the north, which is just 25 miles north of Petersburg. Grant is trying time and time again. Some of these offensives are quite successful, of course, working primarily with the Army of the Potomac, but also often in conjunction with the Army of the James. There's going to be numerous actions going on during that 292 days before they finally crack what has been a very difficult egg here at Petersburg. So the last really week of fighting here at Petersburg is going to be this 8th and 9th offensive. The 8th offensive is going to be fought largely southwest of the city. On March 25th, however, Lee is going to try a last bold move to try to create some space between him and Grant. And he's going to attack at Fort Stedman, which is east of Petersburg. He's going to strip a lot of the troops that he has on the earthwork line southwest of Petersburg and send them through Petersburg to attack, threaten that military railroad that runs between City Point, which is Grant's supply depot on the James and Appomattox rivers. And if he can threaten the military railroad, he feels that Grant will hopefully pull back troops to protect that important supply base, and leaving him an avenue to get out of Virginia, go into North Carolina, or at least part of his army, and join up with General Joseph Johnston down there with a combined force to take on Sherman, who has worked his way up through South Carolina into North Carolina at this point. So that attack at Fort Stedman is going to kick off early on the morning of March 25th. And although successful at first in capturing Fort Stedman, the Confederates are going to be eventually pushed back to their earthwork lines. Results in a lot of soldiers being captured for the Confederates. And it leaves an opportunity southwest of Petersburg for the 6th Corps, who is positioned there, to make a forward movement. And although it's sort of tentative at first, and General Horatio Wright, who commands the 6th Corps, is somewhat cautious initially, they eventually push forward at what's known as the Battle of Jones Farm later in the day on March 25th, and they capture the Confederate picket line. And that doesn't sound much at first, but really what that does is help set the stage for the April 2nd attack about a week later. Grant continues to move to the southwest of Petersburg, though, on March 29th, and on the 31st, they do capture the Boyd and Plank Road finally. On April 1st, General Sheridan's forces, along with Gouverneur K. Warren's 5th Corps, are going to defeat General Pickett at Five Forks. And when General Grant hears about that victory at Five Forks, he puts all of his cards on the table, informs the commanders of the 6th Corps, Horatio Wright, and commander of the 9th Corps, John Park, to make an assault on the Confederate lines in their front on the morning of April 2nd. General Wright responds back very boldly and says, "We will go in solid and make the fur fly," which is kind of interesting considering how cautious he had been a few days later, but earlier. But what they're going to do is here on the 6th Corps front, which is mainly what I'm going to be talking with you guys about today, and Jake has that map up for us now, is they are going to bombard the position, the Confederate position, for about 3 hours the night before this attack. So from about 10 p.m. on April 1st until about 1 a.m. on April 2nd, they're going to use all their artillery in the forts that you see, Fort Welch, Fort Gregg, Fort Fisher, to bombard a mile-wide front and even further with artillery trying to soften it up and make it easier for this Union infantry assault to succeed the following morning. This assault is going to consist of 3 divisions: General Seymour on the left, General George Washington Getty in the center, and General Wheaton on the right. 8 brigades, 42 regiments, about 14,000 men are going to be making this charge. And while this bombardment is going on for that 3 hours, they use that opportunity to get their men into alignment up on that forward Confederate picket line that they had captured. So they're only about 800 yards from the Confederate main line at this point. So it's going to be a real good position for them to make this charge. And if they had not captured that Confederate picket post, picket line back on March 25th, they would not be able to be as close as they are. What that also had given them an opportunity to do is to see some weaknesses in the Confederate line before they make this assault. So they know exactly where they want to attack, where a couple of branches of Arthur's Swamp run through the earthworks. They know that it's very weak right there, although the Confederates have artillery trying to make it less vulnerable. So these poor guys, they tell us that that night was very, very cold and raw, as they describe it. They're laying on the ground, prone position, with the rifles loaded, bayonets on, but no percussion cap. They don't want the soldiers to stop and fire, breaking their formation. They want to go in solid. And as you can see from this map, they're going to stack their regiments in column form. They've learned through previous practice at places like Rappahannock Station, at Marie's Heights in May of 1863 during the Chancellorsville campaign, and also at Spotsylvania, that the most impact can occur if you stack your regiments and go in with too many people really for them to shoot. So as you can see, the center of this attack is going to be led by the Vermont Brigade, which is 6 regiments deep in this attack. Leading this attack is the 5th Vermont, and leading the 5th Vermont is Company H. And Company H is being led by a young man named Charles Gould. If you go to the next slide, show you a picture of Captain Gould, 19 years old, getting ready to turn 20 in May of 1865. And as this attack kicks off, that signal gun fires finally at 4:40 a.m. Originally, the attack was supposed to go off at 4. But finally, at 4:40 a.m., the signal gun fires when there's some light coming up on the eastern horizon, and these 14,000 men start rushing forward. Captain Gould and his men are going to hear commands from behind them saying, bear left, bear left. And he and his company break off to the left and proceed through all these obstacles like the abatis, the telegraph wire around tree stumps, making trip hazards. They get through the fray and then into the ditch, and Captain Gould somehow scurries up that earthwork wall. And as soon as he's standing on top of the earthwork wall, Confederate soldier behind there as a defender raises his rifle and points right at his chest, pulls the trigger, but luckily for Captain Gould, the gun misfired. So he jumps down into the earthworks, and obviously, since he's the first man coming over, he is going to start drawing these Confederate soldiers to him like a magnet. Another Confederate soldier rushes over with a bayonet on his rifle, lunges up, and catches Captain Gould in the left cheek, and the bayonet goes through his chin and out his open mouth. Somehow he's able to get that bayonet away from his face, and he runs his sword through that Confederate soldier. A Confederate officer nearby, though, who has a sword, runs over, rears back his sword, and hits Captain Gould across the top of the head. Again, I think he's very fortunate. Either it hits on the flat side of the sword, or the sword wasn't sharpened because it doesn't cut through his cap or his scalp. But he tells it it's like getting hit over the head with a club. He looks back over the earthworks to try to see where his men are because he has outpaced them, and he gets grabbed by his overcoat, yanked into the floor of the earthworks, and another Confederate soldier bayonets him in the upper back, just barely missing his spinal column. So here he is, wounded on the earthwork floor with a wound to his face, to his scalp, head, and the back. And fortunately for him, by the time he receives that third wound, his men and all these other Union soldiers along this mile-wide front start pouring over that earthwork wall, pushing out those Confederate defenders. A lot of hand-to-hand combat going on back there. Gould's going to be actually rescued by Corporal Henry Recor, who is serving as part of the color guard. Going to pull Gould back over the earthworks into the ditch, and they're going to make their way back to the Union lines where there are forward hospitals. One of these hospitals apparently was in the camp of the 50th New York Engineers, which is on ground now preserved by Poplar Grove National Cemetery. From there, they were taken often by ambulance to the United States Military Railroad. You can go to the next slide. And on the military railroad, these soldiers were put on cars and then sent to City Point, where they could finally receive a little bit more significant medical care that they needed. At City Point, there was a huge hospital complex, both tents as well as barracks, very, very technologically advanced medical system here. One account that I actually came across said that they were actually had running water in some of these wards because they had steam engines that would pump fresh water from springs along the Appomattox River up into a reservoir and then run through pipes to these different wards. And one of the accounts I came through gave a very good rating as far as the sanitary condition. It said, quote, "The general sanitary condition of the hospitals at City Point was invariably good. Good order, discipline, and cleanliness were constantly maintained," which we all know that's really important and was a constant challenge for Civil War medical services, was keeping things clean. You go to the next slide. As I mentioned, this is a photograph showing some of the hospital tents there at City Point. There's some really great photographs on the Library of Congress website that shows the hospital complex at City Point. And again, very advanced. And City Point, again, just a really a game changer in the Petersburg campaign, along with that military railroad throughout the whole campaign, picking up wounded soldiers, taking them back to City Point. Ones who needed even extra care could be put on ships and sent to Washington, D.C. and Philadelphia and other hospitals to get them away from the front to recover. Wounded soldiers in each one of these offensive that Grant leads need care, and they're getting that at City Point. And it's a pretty impressive hospital situation. You can go to the next slide, Jake. One of the Confederate soldiers who's going to be catching the brunt of this attack is Octavius Wiggins, who's pictured here. He's a lieutenant in Company E of the 37th North Carolina. And The 37th North Carolina is the one that's pretty much catching the brunt of the Vermont Brigade's attack. General James Lane's Confederates are the ones that are stationed right where Pamplin Park is today. So you had the 37th, the 28th, the 18th, and the 33rd North Carolina trying to defend this line, along with some of Edward Thomas's Georgians to the north and some of Eric Urson's North Carolina, a couple of North Carolina regiments to the south. About 2,800 men trying to hold off about 14,000 Union soldiers. That's one reason that this attack is over relatively quick, is because of those stacked columns, and the Confederates just don't have enough men. They're spaced out along this line about 10 or 12 feet apart from each other, trying to defend the line. But during the attack, Wiggins is going to be caught up in some of that hand-to-hand fighting, and the Union soldier is going to fire his gun so close to his face that the bullet's not going to hit him, but he's going to be burned severely by the muzzle flash, and it blows black powder into his face and temporarily knocks him senseless, as well as temporarily blinds him. Of course, being unable to move anywhere after that, he's going to be quickly captured. And as they're taken to City Point to be processed, they're put on boats, and then by railroad, they're going to be sent, the officers, at least some of them, to Johnson's Island in Ohio. And on the train ride from Virginia to Ohio, Wiggins is going to jump off the train, and he's going to start walking back, disguised in civilian clothes eventually, makes his way to Richmond. And when he gets to Richmond, he finds out that General Lee had surrendered on April 9th at Appomattox, and he continues his walk home back to Halifax County, North Carolina. He's going to fully recover, as far as I'm aware, from all those wounds that he'd received to his face. And next slide. So yeah, I want to try to profile some of these soldiers that received some very significant wounds. The next one we're going to talk about here is Lieutenant Gardner Hawkins of the 3rd Vermont. And Hawkins, like Charles Gould, was a very young officer. Of course, not quite the advanced captain that Gould was, but he's only 19 years old at this time, Gardner Hawkins is. And as he's leading his men forward during this attack, they do receive some pretty significant Confederate fire, along with some artillery support. And some of his men either go to their stomachs on the ground for protection, or they just kind of freeze. And he pulls out his sword and starts waving it around his head, trying to encourage them forward to go on. And as he's doing that, he catches a Confederate projectile right in the face and goes down, but he's unwilling to leave the field until he is sure that his men have broken through the line. And after his soldiers break through that Confederate line, they come back and check on him. And he allows them to take him back to the forward hospitals, where he does receive some care. And then he also gets sent back to City Point. And his wound is severe enough that he actually gets sent back to Vermont rather quickly to recuperate at home. And I came across in his service records his doctor's report, trying to give him an extension on his recovery time. And it said that Hawkins was, quote, suffering in consequence of a wound by a ball passing in near the ear, over the cheek, under the eye, through the nose, and out the opposite side. So it must have just went right over his cheek, broke his nose, and came out the other side. It must have been an excruciatingly painful wound. And while he's recovering at home in Vermont, he actually reads in the newspaper a report of his death. It must have been so bad. But he is going to go on and live to be 67 years old and receive a Medal of Honor for his heroism on April 2nd. Next slide. Marion Hill Fitzpatrick is in the 45th Georgia, Edward Thomas's Georgia Brigade, which is just to the north of Lane's brigade. And Marion Hill Fitzpatrick, he had just returned back to his unit on March 28th after suffering an illness. So he had missed that March 25th Jones Farm fight, and he comes back to his regiment, and there's many fewer men than had fought a few days before, March 25th. Some of them had been captured, some had been wounded, some had been killed. But during the fighting on April 2nd, Marion Hill Fitzpatrick is going to receive a wound very high on his right thigh. And I'm not sure exactly how this happens during all the chaos and confusion, but he gets evacuated off the battlefield, taken to Petersburg, and somehow ends up on a train and gets sent to Richmond in all this confusion and chaos. In Richmond, he receives some medical care, and then they send him back to the south side of the James River to a little town called Manchester outside of Richmond. And he's in a private hospital there and dies either on the 4th or the 6th of April. There's some confusion over which day he actually died. But one of the men that's in that private hospital with him writes back to Fitzpatrick's wife in Georgia and tells him about his passing, and that his wound was so high up on his thigh that the doctors were unwilling to perform an amputation on it. So he must have suffered from a tremendous trauma as well. If you've never read Fitzpatrick's collections of letters called Letters to Amanda, I highly suggest it to get a feel for the common Confederate soldier throughout the war. He served from 62 to 65. And the next one. So a lot of these Confederate soldiers that are wounded, well, in the March 25th fighting and some of the earlier fighting and some of those that are sick are at a hospital just on the western suburbs of Petersburg called the Fairgrounds Hospital. And after the Union Army finally captures Petersburg after the Confederate evacuation the following day on April 3rd, the Fairgrounds Hospital is going to continue to treat those Confederate soldiers that are there, but then also they're going to start treating Union soldiers as well there at the Fairgrounds Hospital. And running this hospital was a gentleman named John Herbert Claborne, which is the next slide. And one of the accounts that I came through said at the Fairgrounds Hospital, the Union report said that the enemy left, meaning the Confederates, 149 badly wounded in a well-appointed hospital located on the suburbs and known as the CS Hospital. So that's the Fairgrounds Hospital. John Claborne is a pre-war doctor in Petersburg. He had received his education at the University of Pennsylvania, which was one of the best medical schools in the antebellum period. And before the war, he served as a doctor there in Petersburg. But during the war, they turned all the medical hospitals in Petersburg over into his care, and he's going to oversee several different hospitals. Now, as the Union Army starts bombarding Petersburg during the campaign, the hospitals have to often leave town and move off to the west side out of range of the Union shelling. And that's when they set up that Fairgrounds Hospital, and Dr. Claborne's going to be running that. In 1904, he published his memoir, and he told about the chaos and confusion of April 2nd. I'll just read a short quote from him. He said, quote, "As I stood in the hospital door, loath to leave my home and city, for I felt that I should never see it again as I saw them then, if I ever saw them at all. The wounded were being hurried in from ambulances and upon stretchers, their moans mingling with the cries of women and shrieking and bursting of shell and the hoarse orders of men in authority." Claiborne's going to evacuate with the Army of Northern Virginia and continue on with it toward Appomattox. But as the Union report mentioned, there are a number of Confederates that are so severely wounded that they're not going to be able to be evacuated, and they're going to be left there. Next slide. One of the units that also receives pretty heavy casualties during the breakthrough on the far Union left is the 6th Maryland Infantry. And one of those soldiers, John Osborne, is going to receive a severe wound that I wasn't able to find a description of in his service records, but he's going to be put on that military railroad, sent to City Point Hospital, and is going to survive for 2 days until he dies on April 4th, 1865. And today he rests in peace in the City Point National Cemetery, which is another place I would encourage. If you ever come to see Grant's headquarters at City Point, spend a little extra time and go over and pay your respects to all the soldiers who are at City Point National Cemetery. Next slide. One of Osborne's comrades and officers, field officers in the 6th Maryland is this gentleman you see here. His name is Clifton Peterson. He is major, and he has a very unique story. Before the war, He came from a family that was divided. His younger brother, William, is going to serve in the 2nd Maryland Battalion, Confederate regiment or battalion. And they're not going to really have any contact throughout the war. But on April 2nd, during the attack, Clifton Prentice is going to receive a serious wound to his chest in the attack here where Pamplin Park is today. And his brother William is a little bit further down the earthwork line, about maybe a mile or a mile and a half, fighting with the 2nd Maryland Battalion, trying to defend the line. And he is also going to receive a wound during the fighting on April 2nd to his leg. And both of these men are going to be taken to a hospital unknowingly that each brother is wounded. And while in that forward hospital, William, the younger brother that's a Confederate, is going to ask if anybody knows about the 6th Maryland or about his brother. And they happen to say, yes, we certainly know him. He's our major, and he's laying not too far away. So William asks if they will bring him over to see his brother, but they first go over and ask Clifton, and Clifton wants nothing to do with William. He sees him as the enemy, as a traitor, even though he's family, blood, does not want to see him at first, but finally they convince him, due to the severity of each soldier's wounds, to try to forgive and forget and reconcile, and they finally do. Both men are going to be eventually taken to Armory Square Hospital in Washington, D.C., and the famous Walt Whitman is actually going to minister to both of these men there at that hospital and write a little bit in his diary about them. Unfortunately, William, that had the leg wound, the Confederate, is going to die in June from complications to his injury. Clifton is going to be actually released, and he's going to spend some time in Brooklyn, New York, at his brother's house, trying to recover, but he also dies from his wound in August of 1865. And eventually, both of these brothers end up being buried side by side in a cemetery called Greenwood Cemetery in Brooklyn, New York. So truly reconciled. Now, on another front is fighting, which I haven't mentioned too much about, is the 9th Corps, also attacking at the same time, early that morning on April 2nd. And very much like the 6th Corps, they are going to stack their regiments, and they're going to guide on the Jerusalem Plank Road, today's Crater Road, right into the Confederate teeth of the defense. And where they're attacking, the fortifications are much more convoluted. There's lots of multiple layers of earthworks. There's covered ways, there's rifle pits, there's artillery, and these lines are manned by General John Brown Gordon's corps and mainly Brian Grimes's brigade. And they're going to meet much stiffer resistance than the 6th Corps had where Pamplin Park is today. Unfortunately, all this area where the 9th Corps is attacking has all been developed in the years since the Civil War, so there's hardly anything there to tell you much other than some monuments, particularly a couple of very impressive Pennsylvania monuments, one to Colonel Gowan of the 48th Pennsylvania, who is going to receive a mortal wound on April 2nd. And a lot of these very high-numbered Pennsylvania regiments also are going to receive some very significant casualties there in that attack. The 9th Corps Hospital reported in their official report, quote, "There were brought to the division hospitals of the 9th Corps from the scene of the assault on April 2nd, 1,114 wounded, including 21 rebels. They were promptly conveyed to the Depot Field Hospital at City Point by railroad." And the final slide that I have here for you will kind of show you what this terrain looks like there at what's known as Fort Mahone. Fort Mahone was also called Fort Damnation, and the attack came from the Union Fort Sedgwick, named after General John Sedgwick, who used to be the commander of the 6th Corps, also known as Fort Hell. So you had Fort Hell for the Union and Fort Damnation for the Confederates. And you can see that these soldiers were charging right into hell and damnation and took serious casualties there, trying to push them out. Now, the 9th Corps is never going to be successful in breaking through the lines there southeast of Petersburg. The Confederates are going to hold them off, until they evacuate during the night of April 2nd into the morning of April 3rd. And those Ninth Corps forces move on into Petersburg early on the morning of April 3rd. And of course, during the night of April 3rd, Lee moves his forces across to the north side of the Appomattox River. He recalls the forces out of Richmond and along the Bermuda Hundred, and he starts heading west to Amelia Courthouse, where there's supposed to be supplies and rations for his men. But when he gets there, those rations are not there, and they continue on west, being harassed by the Union Army all the way to Appomattox Courthouse on April 9th. Finally, with the help of Sheridan's cavalry, as along with the 24th, parts of the 24th Corps, as well as some of the United States colored troops from the 25th Corps, they're going to cut off Lee's continued retreat to the west and force the surrender on April 9th, one day to this fighting, 1 week to the day of this fighting here at Petersburg on April 2nd. So you probably haven't heard of the breakthrough like you have your Antietam's or your Gettysburg, but as far as being a decisive charge, I don't know of another Union charge that was more decisive than that Sixth Corps charge in what it resulted from it, by breaking through the lines, forcing the evacuation of Petersburg and Richmond, and the surrender of the Army of Northern Virginia 1 week later. It's hard to make an argument for being a more decisive charge in the whole Civil War by the Union Army.
Well, thank you so very much, Tim, for sharing these stories with us today. I know this is a very busy time of year for you and everyone at Pamplin as you're commemorating the anniversary of these events that you've recalled today. Before we go, I do want to give you an opportunity to share how, if anyone was riveted as I was with today's presentation and they want to learn more and to visit Pamplin, how would they go about doing that? And how can those who may not be able to visit but want to support your efforts, how might they be able to do that from afar?
Thank you. Yes, those that can come to the park, I highly encourage them to come see us. We've got 424 acres and cover much more than the Civil War. We cover the antebellum Southern history with Tudor Hall Plantation here. We've got the National Museum, the Civil War Soldier, and of course we have the Breakthrough Battlefield and those surviving Confederate earthworks. So we have a great educational facilities here. Plan to spend 3 or 4 or 5, 6 hours here. We've got lots to see and do to spend time here. Those that aren't able to come but want to support us, like Jake said, follow us on Facebook. We have a website, pamplinpark.org. We have a donate button on there. If you're able to send us some financial support, we would certainly appreciate that. If you're able to spread the word on what we do, keep up with our special events page, let us know. We'd love to see you come visit us, but if you can't, there's plenty of ways to help otherwise.
Excellent, and we'll share those links into the comments on this video, so you can go directly to Pamplin's website, to their Facebook page, so you can follow them, support them, and we highly encourage. I've had the opportunity to visit on one occasion Pamplin to actually speak about Clara Barton on Memorial Day, and it was an amazing experience. And Tim and the folks down there at Pamplin do an amazing job of interpreting this history that we heard about today, but also, as Tim mentioned, a wider array of history in this particular part of Virginia. Again, thank you so much, Tim, for coming on with us today. And I look forward at some point, we'll get you back on, since this is video number 2 with you. We'll get you back on. We'll find some more stories to tell. You always have such a fascinating array of personal accounts, and I know you do a lot of reading. Get to follow that on Facebook, and I know that you always are collecting these kind of stories to tell.
Thank you very much.
All right, and for the folks who are watching with us still, if you want to support our efforts at the National Museum of Civil War Medicine in working in partnership with folks like Tim at Pamplin Park and other historical institutions. You want to support programs like this, consider becoming a member of our institution. We are a nonprofit organization, and becoming a member helps to support videos like this. So please consider supporting us. You can go to the link that you'll find in the comments section to become a member and supporter of the National Museum of Civil War Medicine. You can also support us and this video by clicking the like button, giving us a thumbs up, following our pages, whether we're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or if you're watching on YouTube, please subscribe. That allows us to continue doing what we do and lets us know that you are enjoying these programs as well, and spreads it further to others who may be interested in this programming as well. So thank you all out there for all of your support for these videos. Really appreciate those of you who have supported us over the last very difficult year. And we are looking forward to continuing to share these programs even as we are beginning to speed up in our reopening strategy and our reopening plans. We are going to continue doing these sorts of programs. So we hope you'll tune in with us. We hope you'll come visit our institutions, both the Civil War Medicine Museum and Pamplin Park. And thank you all so much for watching with us today. We'll see you next time. This is Jake Wynn from the National Museum of Civil War Medicine, signing off.